Windows Vista mobile computing. One of the things that Microsoft have gone to great lengths to improve is the support for mobile computing in Windows Vista. Back when Windows 2000 was around, and even in the early days of Windows XP, people with notebook computers were greatly outnumbered by those using desktops, and there wasn't a huge demand of power-saving features and notebook-friendly tools that we see today. In fact, I think it was back in 2005 the sales of notebooks passed desktops for the first time as users became more mobile and as the performance of notebook computers finally became equal to that of some desktops. So in Windows Vista, Microsoft have recognized the importance of the notebook computer, and they've beefed up the operating system to help users squeeze the best possible performance out of their notebook computers. One of the changes Microsoft have made in Windows Vista is the introduction of what they call power plans, and they allow you to quickly change the power mode of your notebook computer so you can adjust your settings on the fly so you can either improve the performance of your notebook or maximize its battery life. Now, the power buttons on your computer can also be assigned a behavior as well, ranging from turning off your notebook to sleeping and other choices. And people who perform presentations will also appreciate the way Windows Vista handles connecting to a projector in order to display your PowerPoint presentation. And even tablet PC users and those using handwriting tools like a pen haven't been left out either, and Windows Vista supports an improved way of assisting people who use these features. And finally, we're going to take a look at how we can configure offline files so that we can still access our network-connected files even when the network is unavailable due to us having network issues or simply unplugging our notebooks from the network. Now, I'm currently connected to a Sony Vaio notebook here, so we can take a look at some of the mobility options we have within Windows Vista. You see, some of the options you get with Windows Vista aren't available when you're logged onto a regular desktop, so for the purposes of us being able to demonstrate all of the mobility options, we'll be using a notebook. So we'll click on the Windows Start button, and we'll fire up the control panel. And down the bottom here, we're looking for this green mobile PC link. Now, on a desktop computer, this mobile PC link won't be here, and it will only appear on a notebook computer. So we'll click Mobile PC, and you can see here, we've got a whole control panel section designed specifically for mobile PCs. Now, I will point out ahead of time that a lot of the options that you see here in this control panel, particularly on this screen, appear multiple times, so I'm not going to go through everything here. For example, at the top of this screen here, you can see a link to adjust the screen brightness of your notebook, and in the middle under the personalization heading, we can also see another link to do exactly the same thing. And you'll find that in many of these links, they simply repeat a lot of the options you have here. Alright, well, the first option we have at the top is the Windows Mobility Center, so if we click this, this gives us an overall summary of what's being configured in a lot of the other options we have in the screen behind. For example, we could lower our display's brightness by sliding this slider bar down to the left, which of course is going to save our battery life since the notebook screen is one of the biggest chewers of battery life. We can adjust our system volume. Here we can see the status of the notebook battery, and in my case here, the Sony Vaio I'm using is using its own inbuilt power plan to optimize the battery, so your display here might differ slightly depending on the type of notebook that you're using. Now, that said, we can override the Sony software on my notebook and then choose our own settings if we like. Now, currently, I'm not using wireless on my Sony. It's connected via Ethernet, but we can turn it off if we don't need it, and that, of course, will save battery life. We can connect our notebook to an external display. We could synchronize our notebook with another computer, such as our desktop, and we can connect our notebook to a projector if we're planning on doing a presentation. Now, if we close this window, at the top here, under this green Windows Mobility Center heading, you can see that some of the options we just looked at are also listed here. Adjusting commonly used mobility settings, adjusting the screen brightness, and connecting to a projector or external display are all going to bring up the exact same window as we just looked at, and you can see that same window there. But the adjust settings before giving a presentation is different, and this allows you to put your notebook into presentation mode. So if you check this box that you're currently giving a presentation, this forces your notebook to do a few things. Firstly, your notebook will stay on, meaning it won't hibernate or go into sleep mode. And whilst in this mode, it won't display any pop-up system notifications. And this is good, since the last thing you want when getting up in front of people and presenting is to have your notebook shut itself down to save battery life, or perhaps throw up messages telling you need to update it. So it's going to hide all of those messages, so your computer is now free to display your presentation without hindering you with all of those things. Now the default is to also turn off the screensaver when you're presenting, which is also a good idea, since you aren't always actively using the notebook during a presentation. You might be fielding questions from the audience, for example, and by disabling the screensaver, it can prevent yet another unprofessional moment of having your PC drop into screensaver mode, forcing you to stop what you're doing and get your presentation back on track. Now, when in presentation mode, we can also pre-configure our volume to a certain setting if we like, and we can also choose to show a different background when we're presenting, which is another nice feature, as it allows you to keep your standard desktop wallpaper intact and then move to, a more professional wallpaper, such as, say, your company logo when you're presenting. And these touches are quite nice, and I'm sure that most people that give presentations regularly are going to love them, since it means that you don't have to sacrifice your normal look and feel of your notebook just because you occasionally present. So you have, in a way, two sets of settings, your normal ones and these ones that are activated when you're giving a presentation. Okay, the next option we have here is power options, which are always welcome on a notebook computer. Now, by default, Windows Vista comes pre-configured with 3 power plans, and you can see these listed here, although on my Sony notebook, its inbuilt software has replaced the first one with this VAIO optimized plan. But on a standard Windows Vista install, it's actually called balanced. So whenever you see my VAIO optimized profile here, on a standard notebook, it will say balanced. Okay, so we also have a power saver and a high performance profile as well. And these 3 power plans are rather self-explanatory. The default is actually set to balance, or VAIO optimized in my case, and over here on the right hand side, we can see that Windows will try and balance the battery life with the performance of your system. So what Vista will do is lower the power consumption of your components, like the CPU for example, when the computer is relatively idle and not doing much, and that'll save battery life, and it will let the CPU run at full speed when it needs the extra power to run its application. So as the name would suggest, it's a balanced approach. Now next we have the power saver plan, which really slows down the notebook speed, which makes it obviously run slower. But if you're on the road a lot, you'll probably appreciate the fact that your battery's going to last a lot longer. And finally we have the high performance plan, which obviously ensures that your notebook here is going to run at full speed, but it's going to give little thought to the battery life. So if you want to change from the plan that you're currently on to another one, of course all we have to do is simply click the button. So you can choose any of these plans. Just bear in mind that if you do choose this high performance plan down here, then your battery life will probably be cut by at least half on most computers. Now, rather than changing these settings, you might also like to create your own power plan, and you can do that by clicking on Create a Power Plan link here on the left-hand side. So let's create a new one, and we'll try to create one that maximizes our battery life. So we'll need to choose from one of the 3 inbuilt plans as a baseline for our new plan, and you'll notice here at the top that our balance plan is back. So since we want to create a plan that maximizes our battery, I'm going to choose the Power Saver plan as my baseline, and we'll need to give this plan a name, so I'm just going to call this one Long Battery Life, and we'll click Next. Alright, well now we can set options to turn off our notebook screen when the computer is running on batteries or plugged into power. Now the default for this plan is to turn off the display after 5 minutes of inactivity when it's running on batteries, and although that's probably fine, I'm going to set this to a lower value, say 3 minutes. Now with this setting here, it doesn't shut down the computer or anything like that, it just simply blacks out the screen, and any keyboard or mouse activity is going to bring it back up immediately. So 3 minutes here for me is fine. Now we can also choose to put the computer to sleep after 20 minutes of inactivity, and that'll shut the PC down into a low power state, but I'm going to set this one here to say 15 minutes. And finally, we can change our display's brightness. Now what you choose here is really a balance between how long you want your battery to last versus how well you can view a dimly lit screen. So play around with this screen brightness here and set it to a level you feel comfortable with, and that'll definitely help your battery life. Now when we're plugged into power, these settings here obviously aren't affecting your battery life, so you can choose whatever you like, and personally I like to set these to the highest value and leave my brightness at full. Alright, now we'll click Create, and we can see here that our power plan has been created, and we can also now see any other power plans that were on our computer but hidden from view as well. But you can see these ones down the bottom at any time by simply coming into this window and clicking on this little arrow icon here on the right, and that's why they were hidden. So all we need to do is select that, and you'll see every single plan that's available on your computer. Okay, the other options we have here at the top of this window are to configure whether we want Vista to force us to re-enter our password when the computer wakes up from sleeping. We can set what action pressing the power button on our notebook will perform, and what we want to do if we close the lid on our notebook. Now, all of these three options here are going to take you to the same screen, so it doesn't matter which one we select here. Okay, so what do you want your computer to do when you press the power button? The default behavior for pressing the power button whilst on battery or on power is to sleep the notebook, but you can make it do nothing, you could hibernate it, or you could shut it down completely. Now for those of you that don't know the difference between sleep and hibernate, sleep is basically the first step before hibernating. When you sleep Windows Vista, everything that you're doing is written to memory. Then the notebook shuts down. Now your notebook only needs a tiny bit of power to keep this memory alive. So when you come back and restart your computer, everything's there and the PC will start up very quickly with all your applications still open. And typically, it's only going to take a few seconds to get your PC back up and running. Hibernation is when those same applications and documents are written to the hard disk instead of memory. Now it uses no power since the computer simply shuts down after it's saved everything. Now the downside is that it takes longer for a hibernated computer to start up than a sleeped computer does, but the upside is that it still starts up quicker than if we had completely shut our notebook down. Okay, so we can also choose what we want our notebook to do when we close the lid or fold down the screen, and again we have exactly the same options of sleeping, which is the default, doing nothing, hibernating it, and of course shutting it down. Now down the bottom of this window here you can see that the default is set to yes. It will require you to enter in your password when the notebook wakes up from sleep mode, and of course you can change this if you prefer not to enter in a password at all. Okay, well if we go back to mobile PC, the other options we have here are personalization options, which is exactly the same as right-clicking on the desktop and choosing Personalize. And we can go directly to our screensaver and desktop background settings if we like. Now adjusting our settings before giving a presentation and adjusting the screen brightness options we've already talked about, so the next option we have here is for tablet PCs. Now before we get started talking about these options, in case you weren't aware, back in Windows XP, there was a version of Windows XP called the Tablet PC Edition. This isn't available as a separate version of Windows Vista now, because with Vista, all of the tablet PC features are included in every version of Vista except for the Home editions. Okay, so on the General tab of our tablet PC settings, we can set where the menu should appear when we right-click on our tablet PC. And we can set the menus to appear on the left if we're right-handed, or on the right if we're left-handed. Now we can also use this calibration utility to calibrate the tablet PC's stylus with the screen so Vista can more accurately determine where you're clicking on the screen. And for anyone that's ever used a brand new PDA or tablet PC, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. Now since I'm running with a regular notebook and not a tablet PC, if I click on calibrate, I'm going to get an error myself, as I don't have an active digitizer to calibrate. Okay, on the handwriting recognition tab, the default is to use the personalized recognizer, which personally I'd leave checked since this feature of Vista is what learns your handwriting over time. Obviously, every person has their own style of writing, and as good as handwriting recognition is, no software in existence today can recognize everyone's handwriting perfectly. So by leaving this feature on over time, Vista can recognize the way that you write certain characters is actually a letter E or a letter A and so on. Now on the display tab, we can set the orientation of the tablet PC screen, whether it be set to a landscape or portrait mode, although many tablets do have a hardware feature to set this automatically. And on the other tab, we can configure the tablet PC's pen and input devices, which we can also do if we click cancel here, and then click on our next link for pen and input devices. So here we can set how a pen should mimic a mouse. So if we single tap on the screen, the default is that this is equivalent to a single mouse click. And if we double tap, it's the same as double clicking on a mouse, and so on. Also by default, some tablet PC pens have a button on them, and Vista will use that button as a right click. And on the top of the pen, or the other end, not the writing end, we could also use that as an eraser. Now on the pointer options tab, when you perform any of these actions, single clicking, double clicking, and so on, you'll get this little animated pointer appear, which just gives you a visual clue as to how Vista interpreted the action you just performed. And having used Vista on a tablet PC myself, personally, I'd leave these features enabled since it really does help you identify that you are in fact doing a right click and Vista hasn't thought that you did something else. So say for example you press the button on the tablet PC pen, you're going to see this grey circle appear, and it's rather useful. And all of these pointer animations will replace the regular old mouse pointer whilst you're actively using the pen. Although if you don't like them, you can simply uncheck this box and turn them off if you like. Now the final tab here is the Flicks tab, and this is new in Vista, and this enables you to flick your pen up and down the screen, and Vista will scroll a page in that direction, which is great, especially when viewing long Word documents or web pages. So for example, you could flick the pen down the screen and it's going to scroll the page down the screen. And believe me, once you start using it, you'll find that it's much faster than using the standard scroll bars. So if you flick the pen to the left or the right, Vista will perform the back or forward action, which is really great in Internet Explorer, for example, enabling you to move backward and forward between web pages. Now, if you're not happy with the default navigational flicks, you can also change these to perform different actions than these default scrolling actions. So if we choose this second radio button here, you can see that we can now perform diagonal flicks as well. Now if you hover your mouse over these, you'll get a little tooltip appear telling you what they do, but if we click on the Customize button, not only can you see here that, say, a diagonal upright flick is set to copy to the clipboard, and a downright diagonal flick is set to paste, but if you select these drop-down boxes, you could change these default actions to another action of your choice. So this is great because now you can assign shortcuts to the pen, and in whatever direction you flick the pen, that will use the shortcut of your choice. So if you're a tablet PC user, you'll probably want to spend a little bit of time in here, as it's no doubt going to save you a lot of time later on. Now finally, you can also adjust the sensitivity of the flicks just in case your flicks aren't being recognized by Vista, so play around with this until you feel that Vista is behaving the way you expect it to behave. Now down the bottom here, if you want to practice using flicks, which isn't a bad idea if this is your first time trying this action, we can click this link and then we can run through this learning tool, which will help us learn how to do it properly. And over the right here, you can see what Microsoft means by the term flick. As we can see, this person is flicking their pen up and down the screen to scroll their document. Now, the final option we have here in the Mobility Center is the Synchronization Center, and this allows us to synchronize files from a remote source such as a share on a file server, and that enables you to have a copy of these files on your local computer, which you can then take with you when you pick up your notebook and go on the road, or just have them locally available in case the remote device happens to go down or there's a network problem, and so on. Now, firstly, in order for you to have the ability to work with offline files, you must be running any of the Windows Vista editions with the exception of the Starter and Home versions. Secondly, although it's probably an obvious one, you do need to have a network or remote resource that you want to synchronize with. You see, by default, we don't have any sync partnerships defined. So I'm going to quickly go and set up a network share here so we can see this in action. So I'm going to click on Start. I'm going to right-click on Computer, and we'll select Map Network Drive. Now I can map to any drive letter here. It doesn't really matter. Let's just choose, say, a W drive. And I'm just going to map this to a share that I've set up on a server called CEO/share, and we'll click Finish. Okay, and here's our share, which is currently empty. So let's right-click, and I'm going to create a new text document. And let's just open this up, and we'll just write something in here. This is some text, and we'll close this, and we will save it. Alright, now that we've got a remote share, we'll go back to our computer, and we'll right-click on our share, and we'll choose to make this always available offline. Now, by the way, if you don't see this option here, although you should, since this feature is enabled by default, or let's say you've turned it off and you need to turn it back on again, so to do that, we'll click on Start, we'll fire up the control panel, then we'll choose Network and Internet, and we'll click Offline Files, and from here you'll be able to enable or disable offline files as the case may be. Alright, now that our share has been made available offline, you can see this green icon here over the share indicating that it is a sync partner with our computer. So if we go back to the Sync Center here, you can now see that we have a sync partner set up. So let's double click on this, and inside here you can see all of the shares that we currently have synchronized with our computer. And on the right here, we can see the last time that this folder was synced with our local computer. Now, there are a couple of ways that we can synchronize this network share here with our local computer. If we click on the Sync All button, this is going to update the offline folder so that any differences between our local offline folder that's on our notebook and what's on the share will be copied over to our computer. So now we can unplug from the network and we'll still have this folder available to us. So we can do it manually, as you've just seen, or we could synchronize on a schedule or specific event. Now, when we click Schedule, we can choose which items we want to schedule, and by default, any partnership that we have will be checked here, so we'll just click Next. And then we can choose to schedule our synchronization to occur by a specific time, or when a specific event or action occurs. Now, time-based schedule is pretty obvious. You only need to select a time or a date and start synchronizing, so let's choose the second option. Okay, here we can choose to have our offline folder synchronized when we log onto our computer, if it's idle for a specific time, or if we lock and unlock Windows. Now, if we click on the More Options button, we can also choose from any of these further options, including only starting synchronization if our computer's running on external power, for example. And we can stop it if we suddenly pull the plug and start running on battery. Now, actually, we do have more options than this in Group Policy, but we'll get to that later in this video. So if we select one of these options, I'll say my computer's idle for 15 minutes and click Next. We only need to give our sync schedule a name and then click Save, and we're ready to go. Now once these files are synchronized, we can work with these remote network file shares normally, but if they go offline for any reason, and that could be because of a network problem, or maybe we've just unplugged our notebook from the network so we could go home and do some work out of the office, whatever the reason, we'll now have this folder here available locally to work with, and we'll simply access it in the same way we would our normal share, except this time it'll be coming from our local machine and not the actual share. And when normal network connectivity is back and we can again access this share, our local offline files will be synced back with the ones on the server automatically. Okay, over here on the left, we can view our sync partnerships, which we are doing here right now. We can also view any sync conflicts that we might be having. And you should see we shouldn't be having there any at the moment. We can view our sync results. And hopefully what you'd be seeing here is a bunch of ticks indicating that everything's okay. And of course we can set up any new sync partnerships. Okay, so let's go back to our offline folders. So we'll go and launch the control panel and network and internet, and then we'll select offline files. And as we saw a moment ago, from here you can enable or disable offline files. We can also open the Sync Center window from here, and we can view the offline files that we have currently stored. So if I click on this button and then expand Map Network Drives, there's our share. And if we expand that and select our share, you can see here the contents of our offline files. Now another thing you'll want to be conscious of is the amount of disk space that you'll allow your offline files to use. Since, depending on the folders you're synchronizing with, this could obviously be rather large. So on our disk usage tab, we can see what our current limits are. And if you want to change these, we'll click on the Change Limits button. And then you can set, using these slider bars, how much space you'll allow the offline files to use and how much space you'll allow temporary files to use as well. Now if you want to clean things up straight away, you can also delete temporary files immediately if you like. Okay, on the encryption tab is where we can configure our offline files to be encrypted, and this is a good idea if you're using offline files on a notebook. But don't forget, even though this feature really is mostly thought about for notebook computers, desktops could also use offline files, and it's a good idea to use them when you have slow, unreliable links. But generally speaking, it's more likely that a notebook would be stolen before a desktop, and for that reason, Microsoft recommend that you encrypt your offline files, since it's highly probable that the files that are coming from your network drives are likely to be confidential company files, which you don't want falling into the wrong hands. So to encrypt these files, you can simply click on Encrypt, and be aware that this can take a bit of time if you're planning on encrypting a lot of files, and obviously if you want to unencrypt the offline files, you have the option right here as well. Now the final tab, the Network tab, it's grayed out for me since it needs to be first enabled in Group Policy, but this tab allows you to configure us to automatically work offline when Windows detects a slow network connection, and by default, it's going to check that connection every 5 minutes. So let's take a quick look at how we can change these group policy settings, although I must admit up front that it's unlikely in a workgroup scenario that you'll be editing this Vista policy. This is more likely to be configured in a domain environment, but the process of editing these policies is the same. So we'll click on Start, and we'll type in gpedit.msc, and we'll hit Enter. And we'll take a look at our local computer policy. Now under our computer configuration heading, we'll expand administrative templates, then we'll expand network, and we'll choose offline files. Now in the right hand side you can see we've got quite a few policies here, all relating to offline files, and I'm not going to go through all of them now, but there are a few that I want to highlight for you. Now I'm just going to click this Standard tab so we can see these things a bit easier. Now firstly, if we go and scroll down to the bottom of the list here, you can see here we have this policy, Configure Slow Link Mode. Now this is the policy that, if enabled, will ungrey out that last window we just looked at. So if we right click on this policy, select Properties, and then set it to Enabled, and then we'll click on this Show button here, and if we click Add, we can then either set a specific UNC path and define that as a slow link, or define everything as a slow link by simply entering in an asterisk. Now in this value field here, we need to set what we're constituting to be a slow link by defining the throughput or latency of the connection. So if we click Cancel here and click Cancel again, you can see that this value field here is asking you to enter in the word latency or the word throughput and set that equal to a value. Now since every network is different, I can't exactly tell you what you'll need to enter in there, but you'll probably find that if you're in doubt, start with a latency value of about 25 and then work your way up until you find a happy medium. Okay, well, another popular policy is to force users to encrypt the offline files cache. Now we did look at how to do that manually earlier on, but you can also set it here by policy and all users will be forced to have their offline folders encrypted. And you can also set the disk space used by offline folders, and you can even specify specific folders that will always be available offline with the administratively assigned offline files policy. Okay, well, there's still quite a few other good policies here, and a lot of them you probably will never configure, but it's still a good idea to at least come in here and take a look, since most of you will probably find something that perks your interest. Now, by the way, since I never mentioned it earlier, down here in the system tray, you can see at a glance the status of your battery life. And if you're connected to power, you'll see this battery icon here will have a little power cord over it. So this icon is gradually going to shrink down and show less and less battery life as time goes by. And of course, if we hover our mouse over that icon, you can see how long that Windows Vista thinks your battery's going to last based on its current settings and what you're doing on the notebook. But if you start watching a DVD movie whilst running on battery, you'll expect these numbers here to drop pretty quickly. Now, if we click on this battery icon, you can also get quick access to the power plans on your system and the Windows Mobility Center, where you can change the configuration option of your power plans. So rather than going through the control panel, you can get them from here as well. Now, the final thing I want to point out is the power management settings that are available in Group Policy. So in our policy editor here, under our administrative templates, we'll expand System and we'll expand Power Management. Now here you can see that we have 5 folders relating to practically all aspects of our system that involve power management. So if we select Button Settings, we can control via policy what we want to do when the power button is pressed and what the sleep button does, or what Vista will do when we close the lid on our notebook. Now if we select Hard Disk, we can shut down the hard disk when we're on battery or standard power. Our notification settings, we can choose to notify us when our battery reaches a certain level of charge left, and we can even perform actions when our battery is low. With our sleep settings, this allows us to configure policies detailing what our computer should do when sleeping. And there's even policies in here like this top one that can prevent our computer from sleeping by running specific applications to keep it alive. And finally, we have video and display settings, which is really only display settings, since these policies here deal with shutting off the screen to save power. Now, most of these features can be controlled through the mobile PC control panel application, but of course, when you enable them through policies like these, then you can force these changes system-wide, not just for a specific user account. Okay, in this video, we've talked about the new mobility and offline file options we have with Windows Vista. Since notebook computers and tablet PCs are so popular nowadays, it's great to see that Microsoft have made Vista very mobile PC friendly right out of the box. Unfortunately, over the last few years, we've seen great leaps in functionality and power of mobile computers, but practically no advances in battery life. And if you rely on a notebook computer to keep you going, you'll most likely appreciate the power management features of Vista. So take a look at the power plans within Vista or create your own, and you'll probably find your notebook going that extra mile for you.